Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. I hope all my US-based listeners had a great holiday last week, and I hope you enjoyed the anniversary celebrations we did on last week's episode, but we are back with a more standard format this week as we have some news to touch on, some games to talk about, and then a big definitive ranking topic to hit at the tail end of the show. Joining me for all of that is RPGSite senior staff writer James Galizio. James, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Been very busy over the last week in Final Fantasy XIV and obviously the holidays. Man, it's one thing that people probably aren't aware of unless they're like a big 14 head. They've released the newest like high-end raid on Thanksgiving.
I mean, I guess it's a Japanese-developed game, but at the same time, man.
Yeah, it's been, oh boy.
And there were also, several. I've seen some of our peers in the industry who are playing a specific game that is coming out in, I think, the next few days, who are saying, "Oh, review code for this game came in during Thanksgiving weekend." So it's like, I guess I'm not spending time with my family, which, it's not a great look.
Yeah. They probably thought, well, it's a holiday, so you're going to have free time, right? You don't have any family to spend time with, right?
Yeah, that's not exactly how that works. I would honestly, if I was running a website and that happened, I would be like, hey, don't feel obligated to play this over your Thanksgiving break. Or if you want to, like, we'll give you a different day off to kind of try and make up for it. Like, that was how we would kind of do things over at Game Informer. But James, we have a tradition here on All Things Nintendo when people make their debut appearance, and that is getting to know them through the lens of their history with Nintendo. So start off, what is your first Nintendo game? This could be first game you ever played by Nintendo, first Nintendo system, first Nintendo memory, just anything that you would qualify as like kind of your first memory or interaction with Nintendo.
So I don't remember my specific first Nintendo game because I started playing Nintendo when I was really young, and this is gonna make some people feel old. I had a Game Boy Color when I was like 4 and a copy of like Pokemon Silver, but I don't remember if that was my first Game Boy game. So I'm gonna say Pokemon Silver.
Hey, that's a great way to start your journey through Nintendo fandom, because I think Pokemon Gold and Silver are the best Pokemon games of all time. And that's why Heart Gold and Soul Silver, despite my love and nostalgia for that Gen 1 series, whether that be Red, Blue, Yellow, or
Yeah.
Fire Red and Leaf Green, man, do I love Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Probably my favorite Pokemon games, probably objectively the best Pokemon games. And I never actually played the original Gold and Silver until way later, so I actually vastly prefer Heart Gold and Soul Silver. But yeah, those are fantastic games to start. I mean, I had a Game Boy Color. Did you have the translucent purple one?
I believe it was either that one or it was I think there was like a purple one. I think there was a purple one.
Oh, like the solid purple?
Yeah,
Or
I think
okay.
I think it was a solid purple. I had the translucent, like kind of purplish Game Boy Advance growing
Oh,
up
okay.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I had the translucent purple as the Game Boy Advance or Game Boy Color that I got, and then it came under the Christmas tree with a copy of Pokemon Blue. So we both got similar starts, at least in our Game Boy Color adventures.
there's
Even though
yeah,
my Nintendo love dates back to the NES, so
yeah.
slightly different answers in that regard. But that brings us to the second part of this, which is, what is your favorite Nintendo game of all time?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Like I could be cliche and say my favorite Nintendo RPG, but I think my favorite Nintendo game as a whole has got to be uh you know what? Kirby Air Ride. Let's go with that.
Whoa! That might be the first time we've gotten Kirby Air Ride as an answer to this show, 165 episodes deep. What about that game is like so attractive to you? Because I've actually never played Kirby Air Ride, so sell me on it.
It was one of those games where, I remember back in the day, if you played it like a regular racing game, you would be disappointed because the overall like tracks and whatnot are pretty basic. The controls are pretty basic. Uh, you ask any Kirby Air Ride fan why they like the game, every single one of them is going to tell you City Trial. It's the reason why people were excited for the sort of game mode in Smash Bros. For 3DS that was inspired by it, and they were hoping would have online play so people could like take advantage of it. But it's like the whole idea of here's like a certain amount of time to build up and find the best vehicle and get upgrades for it, and just like basically build for the event that the game's telling you, hey, this is what you should be thinking of. And especially in multiplayer, just like all of the hectic of hey, I want a machine that can like glide really well. But if you're playing in multiplayer, everyone else wants one of those. So sometimes we're fighting each other trying to get the one machine, and if it's like, well, if I can't have it, I'm gonna destroy it. So you have to figure out another plan. It's a lot of fun, and I think a lot of people around my age that had GameCubes have a lot of fond memories about that game in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say it's like a really formative game for them. I guess people much younger than me, but I've never actually had a chance to play it. So hopefully one day I'll get a chance. But yeah, as of now, it just hasn't been one that I have spent any time with. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And we're going to jump into the news in a second. But before we do, I just want to give people a reminder that you can support all things Nintendo through several different methods. The best way is through the Patreon page, which, by the way, is currently, if you're listening to this right when the episode launches, the first month you can get 50% off if you use the code that is listed on the Patreon page. I believe that sale ends December 7th, so act fast if you've ever been curious about what's going on over on the Patreon. Which, by the way, the bonuses include early and ad-free episodes, access to the community Discord, priority for Q&A episodes, and at the $10 level, you get an entire second weekly podcast called All Things Gamers. Other ways to support the show include the merch shop on tpublic.com and my YouTube channel, which you can find at Brian P. Shea. So, James, we've got a little bit of news. I didn't do any news last week because I pre-recorded the episode, but we've got some catch up, and then we've got some stuff to talk about that came out this week. So one of those news stories was last week, Digital Eclipse, which is a developer I sing the praises of all the time over on this show. They put out an announcement that the Switch version of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind, which is their anticipated retro side-scrolling beat-em-up game that looks very much in line with TMNT Shredder's Revenge, only starring, obviously the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, was delayed until December 19th. So it was going to hit every other console on December 10th, but the Switch version was delayed by 9 days. This week, we got an update that was basically LOL, never mind, because it's no longer delayed on Switch and will launch alongside the other versions on December 10th. However, the other part of that original announcement, which is that online play for all platforms is delayed at least a few weeks, is still holding true. In looking into it, apparently they had some sort of technical problems with it, and rather than delaying the entire game, they decided just to push the online aspect of it. So what are your feelings, James, on developers doing that? Would you rather them hold off the entire game? Because I've heard people say, like, I'm really disappointed that the online is not going to be in at launch. But my counter to that is like, I'd rather them delay that than, delay the entire experience.
Really, it's going to depend on each individual developer and what they think better, like best suits the game. I know that there was a lot of hubbub about the fact that Path of Exile 2 got a very last minute delay to later this month. And that was a big deal for a lot of players because there were people that had already taken like time off, like scheduled time off for a
Yeah.
specific like a time window to play the game. For something like this, it's a little tricky because it's the type of game where I feel like multiplayer is the major focus of it, and nowadays, like especially nowadays, I think that most people that are going to be doing co-op are going to be doing it online unless they have a very specific circumstance that gives them a reason to do it in person. So I can completely understand anyone that's disappointed that now they're going to have to wait a couple more weeks to essentially play the game because it's if it's out, but they were always planning to play it in multiplayer, then it's like, well, for those specific players where it's like, well, I am going to play this specifically with my buddies. Well, the game's out, but they probably would have just appreciated a shorter delay that would let them play the multiplayer sooner. But again, all up to the developers what they think is best for their releases and whatnot.
So I'm planning on playing multiplayer with my friends, but at the same time, I'm like, I kind of want to check this out and get it, get some experience with it under my belt and like play through it. and I'll probably play it single player the first time, so I actually don't mind it being that way, but also I feel like if they delay just the online component, anybody who wants to get the game in preparation can do that and then just wait until the multiplayer is
Mm,
available. It doesn't sound like it's a significant delay for the multiplayer, but I would imagine they wanted to get the game out before the end of the year, and maybe that's why they're
for
pushing
the
it out,
holidays,
even though,
yeah.
yeah, I think that's probably the way they're going about it. But I don't know. I've heard people be disappointed that the the online is delayed, which I completely sympathize with. I agree. Like it would be awesome if I could fire up Power Rangers next week and play online with my friends that I planned on playing with. But at the same time, I can still play some. You can almost consider this like an early access period if you really want to,
Yeah,
trick your mind and do the mental gymnastics to justify
yeah.
it.
And maybe not so much on Nintendo platforms, or I guess the Switch for right now. But there's plenty of other multiplayer games launching this week and next week. So it's
Mhm.
like if you're specifically looking for something multiplayer, you're being well fed as of right now.
For sure. Are you into games like this at all, or do you have any kind of like affinity for Power Rangers? You're a little bit younger than me, I believe, so I don't know if you are at that sweet spot with the Power Rangers like
I
I was.
I would have been because Power Rangers was still very popular when I was a kid, but I just never really got into it, and I haven't really even gotten into Common Riders and stuff like that, or Tokusatsu as I've gotten older. I have friends that have gotten into it, but that specific type of game, I remember playing the Simpsons arcade game as a kid, and I specifically played a bunch of Metal Slug when I was younger, which isn't quite the same thing, but alongside a similar vein for like the types of people that like those beat 'em ups probably also are a fan of Metal Slug.
Mhm.
But I love Metal Slug. Phew, it, I when I was a kid, I got to the point where I could one credit clear Metal Slug 3, which if anyone who's played
Wow.
Metal Slug 3, you know how much of a pain in the butt that is, especially the boss of stage 4 where it's like that laser attack, you got to jump right over it at the perfect timing or you're going to get hit. It's like, oh man.
Well, that's impressive. Have you played Metal Slug Tactics?
No, I haven't gotten around to it yet. It's
Okay.
one of the themes of this year, especially over on our end at RPGSite, is that there hasn't been as many major AAA releases this year. But for RPGs, oh man, there's not been enough time for us to play everything.
I looked at my Xbox year in review. We haven't gotten the Nintendo Switch year in review quite yet, but the Xbox year in review, I noticed that two of my top three games were Sega or Atlas RPGs. It was
Same.
Persona 3 Reload, it was Metaphor Refantasio, and then I had Star Wars Outlaws, which actually surprised me because I thought maybe Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth would have rounded out the Sega Atlas trio of RPGs as my top three, but I think Infinite Wealth was actually like my fourth most played game because I played a good bit of it, but I didn't finish it. So I think if I had seen it all the way through, it would have been there. But yeah, I mean, it's been a big year for RPGs. That's not even mentioning things like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth
Oh
and
god.
Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake, a game we're going to be talking about here during the main segment. There's been a lot of big RPGs that have come out this year, so I get it. Like, I'm also far behind on everything, so I can't even imagine when your primary beat is role playing games and you're trying to keep up with the releases of 2024.
Oh god, yeah.
So, as I mentioned, Power Rangers Rita's Rewind arrives on all platforms on December 10th, and I have a feeling that we will touch on that game next week. I love Shredder's Revenge, and I feel like this is going to be very much in line with that style of game. So I'm excited to dive into it, even though it is from, just for clarity, it is from a different developer. That was, uh, completely different studio, completely different publisher. This is Digital Eclipse. So excited to check that out. And speaking of TMNT, James, I don't even know if you've seen this because this news hit right before we hit record. We got an announcement of a new Ninja Turtles game. And unfortunately, it is only confirmed for PC so far, but it looks like it would be a great fit for Switch and very easy to run on Switch.
Yep.
It is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown. It is a turn based strategy game that was announced during the PC gaming show. and it's developed by Strange Scaffold, who also did El Paso Elsewhere and Clickholding, which was a kind of horror
That
style
is
game.
a very interesting developer choice
It
because
is,
those 2
right?
games are very different from what they're doing with that. Because I have seen this. It's like TMNT, like Fire Emblem, and like a GBA style Fire Emblem. It looks really neat. Really
Mhm.
neat.
It does. So standard turn-based tactics gameplay, but with the Ninja Turtles, obviously. The thing I don't quite care about or care for, the characters almost look like amiibos instead of like actual characters. Like they're almost like board game pieces instead of like fully animated characters. I don't know. It just wasn't doing it for me. But the gameplay itself looks like you said, it pulls from like the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblems, and that's pretty exciting to me. And I can probably forgive a lot of the like kind of graphical or character model problems that I have with it, as long as the gameplay and especially the writing are good for this game. But James, you obviously love a good RPG, otherwise you wouldn't be a staff writer at RPGSite. But how are you on tactics?
Uh, that's actually probably my one weak spot. Like I've played a bunch of tactical RPGs in my day, but not as much as like some other people. It's one of those pain points where I do need to go back and play some of the classics. Like this is gonna get me killed, but Final Fantasy Tactics, and
Oh wow.
yeah, it's like I probably would have played it by now if it wasn't for that rumor that it's probably the next thing to get like a remaster, like Tactics Ogre did like a few years ago. So I've been
Mhm.
waiting for that. Otherwise, I probably would have loaded it up on my Vita with the patch that fixes the slowdown. Which, fun fact about that, everyone always talks about there being slowdown on the PSP version of FF Tactics. That's not like a performance issue. They just added it in there for some reason.
Interesting. That I did not know that. That's very funny. I've actually never played Final Fantasy Tactics either, so I would love a remake because or remaster
Yeah,
because everybody who's played it tells me like, "Oh, it's my
yeah,
favorite like tactics game ever." And
yeah.
some people even told me it's their favorite Final Fantasy game ever, which
I
is
can see it. I
very
can
high
see it.
praise.
One tactics game that I have been playing recently is Triangle Strategy came out on MetaQuest a few weeks ago, and I've
Oh,
been checking that out, and that's really fascinating. I talked about it a bit on the RPGSite podcast a few weeks ago, but it's one of those things where you wouldn't really think it would be a major like benefit because it's like, well, it's a traditional game. Well, it's like somehow playing a tactics RPG where you're looking down on things and it's like a chessboard and you're like deliberately moving your units with your hands and whatnot. It's really fascinating. And the way that they've adjusted the user interface to better fit VR and all that is really, really cool. So if you play VR and you're looking for something to sink your teeth into, like that's a good version of that game. And I can give it a recommendation.
that's really cool. Yeah, I'm not a big VR guy because I don't like having a screen strapped like
Mm,
2 inches from my eyes for a long period of time. Like I'll play some VR. Like I reviewed Iron Man VR back in the day. I played, I played all the Astrobot or Astro's Playroom, the one that, or no, Astrobot Rescue Mission. That was the
yes, Rescue
PSVR
Mission.
one. That was super fun. I loved that. And there haven't. I bought the PSVR and I had some fun with it, but it was always like, all right, done with work, gonna sit down, relax, play a video game, and it's like I don't want to put this thing on my face and have to like
Yeah, I get
deal.
it. I get it. It's like I've been like having some like congestion issues like last week and a half. I'm fine now, but I was really hoping to dig my teeth into more Triangle Strategy VR and like get caught up on some other like VR RPGs as well as like finish the new Batman game. And it's like,
I've
man,
heard that's great.
oh, it's incredible. It's probably my favorite Arkham game. So
Wow, were you high on the other Arkham games like Arkham City, Arkham Asylum?
I was okay with Asylum. The main problem was is that I didn't think the boss fights were very good in Asylum, and I thought that City and all the other ones were a bit too bloated for my taste. So
Okay.
this one's more like Asylum, but the boss fights are a lot better, and some of the like movement and what it's really good. It's really good. If you have a Quest 3 or you got a 3S during like Black Friday or something, you already have it for one thing. If you've bought one recently, because it just comes with it, but yeah, it's shockingly enough, it's been a really good year for VR, and it feels like not enough people have noticed that.
Yeah, I certainly have not. Again, Arkham Shadow looks fantastic, and I've heard great things about it. But everything else, I've just kind of been like, eh. I
Yeah.
know Asgard's Wrath was another one that came out late last year that people were really hyped
Yep.
about
That
and
that's
got
one of the
very good
ones
reviews.
I'm trying to get through because like RPGSite, it's kind of like the Game Awards where our since it came out last December would be eligible this year and nobody on staff has finished it. So it's like, well, I have a VR headset. I should at least play it so I can have someone talk about it during our deliberations in like a week or two.
That's like a 40-hour game, right?
Well, that's short considering all the games that came out this year, at
But
least on our beat.
it's not short to have a mask on your face for for 40 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
I always feel exhausted when I come out of VR, but maybe that's just me. But James, we've got some news of a couple of new releases over on Nintendo Switch Online. First up, Donkey Kong Land 3 arrived last week, making it so that the entire Donkey Kong Land trilogy is now available on the Game Boy app through Nintendo Switch Online.
Yep.
Then over on the NES side, you may recall that I was a little bit bummed that the NES version of Tetris was excluded from Tetris Forever. Well, now we're getting the next best thing, as it will be included in Nintendo Switch Online's NES library starting December 13th. Do you have any nostalgia for either of these editions, or is this kind of one of those like, oh, that's good for people who like it?
It's good for people who like it. I feel like unless you're like an NES Tetris speedrunner, I would say there's not much reason to play it over like the DLC for Tetris 99.
I will be playing the crap out of it just because that was one of the very first video games I ever played, and it has like the Nutcracker song in it, which for some reason they just included that in the NES version, and I have so much nostalgia of playing Tetris, that specific version with that specific song.
Yeah.
And it doesn't appear as though the Famicom version, which is in Tetris Forever, has that version. So it looks like it was only in the Western version of Tetris for Nintendo Entertainment System. So I will be playing that version. But yeah, I mean, if I'm going to play a Tetris game, and like for actual Tetris and not nostalgia, honestly, I'm probably firing up Tetris Effect.
Tetris Effect, that makes sense too. For me, I'm a big Puyo Puyo fan. So Puyo Puyo
Okay.
Tetris or Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. I love swap where it's like, hey, so every couple of like seconds, it's going to swap between a Tetris board and a Puyo Puyo board. And both of them are kind of going at the same time. So if you have like a block falling on the Tetris board when it swaps, if you have it fall in the wrong location, you can screw yourself over. It's my favorite multiplayer like puzzle game like mode of all time is just like Puyo Puyo Tetris Swap, where you have to know how to play both games and you can catch people off guard if they're weaker at one versus the other.
Wow. Well, you would destroy me. I'm pretty good at Tetris, but Puyo Puyo I am very bad at. So if we ever played Puyo Puyo Tetris in that specific mode, you would absolutely destroy me. So thanks for warning me so we don't ever play that together. But back in the mid 2010s, James, we were in a very different time for Nintendo, as they were really pushing to get a bunch of games on mobile devices. And one game that came out in 2017 was Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. So it was free to play and it relied on microtransactions. So you could like buy this premium currency. I think they were called leaf tickets.
Something
And
like that,
then
yeah.
you could buy a premium subscription, which opened up access to a bunch of different features and activities and everything. And it was relatively well received by fans. And keep in mind, this was 3 years before New Horizons came out on Switch. So it was a different time in that way as well. But on November 28th, just, last week, that game closed for good. But now we have Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete, which is available now for a limited time, $10 on mobile storefront. It's a one-time purchase, which I love. If you listen to All Things Gamers this week, you heard me talk about some of the different monetization aspects of mobile games. But that price is only going to be until the end of January, at which point it will bump up to $20 for its one-time purchase. And this version retains a lot of the original release, but it removes that premium currency and also removes that monthly subscription cost that was associated with the bonus activities. And you can now earn the Leaf tickets in game and then access the stuff that was only available through the premium subscription via the standard version of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete. And again, if you are interested in this, you want an Animal Crossing game on your iOS or Android device, 50% off from now until the end of January. James, were you an Animal Crossing fan when it came out, or in 2020, right at the start of COVID, or was like a fan of it even before then?
I played a bunch of Animal Crossing on the GameCube and the DS, and I haven't really managed to click with it ever since.
Okay,
I feel like I tried to play City Folk, wasn't really for me. I played New Horizons. Well, everyone played New Horizons at the beginning of COVID. Like it just depends on how long you stuck around with it. Ironically enough, the seasonal event stuff really kind of turned me off. I'm one of those people where
oh,
it's like I play a game and it's like, okay, there's these seasonal events. If I don't have the time to play that game right when the seasonal event happens, I kind of lose interest in playing at all because it just leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth.
I can
Uh,
see that.
yeah, and so obviously with a mobile game, which they all mobile games have stuff like that. I played it for like a little bit, I think, and then I just never really got around to playing any more of it. I might actually play it now that it's I'm glad that this is becoming more of a trend because I know that Capcom did a similar thing with one of their Mega Man mobile games. Like,
Mm.
so I hope that we continue to see like if and when these mobile games like enter like end of life, end of service, we get to see versions of them that maybe this is a bit mean that I'd actually want to play.
I mean, yeah, I forget what the other one was that did this as well, where they were just like, okay, we're ending like the live service aspect of this game. All this content's just available, and you can just purchase a full version of this game essentially. I mean, I guess like they've been doing it kind of with the way like Apple Arcade is, where like there's Sonic Dash on iOS, and then if you have Apple Arcade, you can get Sonic Dash Plus, which is the same game. It just you don't have to have like any premium currency to like continue playing or refill your lives or anything like that. So that's a really good way to experience that instead of playing the free to play version. But it's also, it's free if you have an Apple Arcade subscription, which I do because I have the Apple One subscription, which gives you
Yeah.
like Apple Fitness, Apple TV Plus, Apple Music, and Apple Arcade all in one.
Yeah, I don't think I have to tell you this, but a lot of people are sleeping on how like good some of the releases on Apple Arcade are. Like Sonic Dream Team is genuinely one of the best 3D Sonic games, and people just don't know it because they don't play it.
Yeah, honestly, I'm waiting for it to come to Switch because it feels
Yeah.
like it's going to happen. I mean, that might even be a Game Awards prediction from me is that we get the announcement that Sonic Dream Team is coming to consoles like early next year because it seems like there is a very brief window of exclusivity that's like a year or maybe 2 years. And then these games just almost always, the big hits anyway,
Like
almost
Hello Kitty
always.
Island Adventure, we're gonna be talking about later, obviously, but Fantasian and uh, Pocket Card Jockey's second game was originally an Apple Arcade exclusive before it finally came to Switch, and I think PC or is it this one?
TMNT Splintered
Yeah,
Fate.
TMNT. Yeah,
So yeah, there's plenty of games. Grindstone was an Apple Arcade exclusive originally. There are a lot of examples. So I would be shocked if next year or like maybe even they announce it at the Game Awards and the release coincides with Sonic
yeah.
3
I
hitting theaters.
really, I really hope so. My one main concern is that there was a Choo Choo Rocket game on Apple Arcade that, from what I've heard, is really good, but it got delisted like over 2 years ago and hasn't had any noise about being ported anywhere since.
Well,
So,
I mean, Sega also doesn't really pay too much attention to Choo Choo Rocket, whereas
yeah,
Sonic, that franchise has been on an upward trajectory the past,
yeah, yeah,
4 or 5 years. So hopefully they do bring it over because I did play like the first half of that game, I think, and then I was like, I kind of just want to play this up on a big screen because my iPad couldn't handle it, but my iPhone it ran like a, excuse the pun, a dream. And it, it's a really well designed, fun game. It's a unique take on the Sonic franchise, so I wouldn't be opposed to that coming to Switch or any other
yeah.
console for that matter.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, and like you said, we're going to be talking about another Apple Arcade exclusive that is coming to consoles this very week during the main segment. But James, unfortunately, we are going to end the news segment on a bummer note because Ubisoft has announced that it is closing two of its studios and laying off nearly 300 people. And these closures include its San Francisco and Osaka studios. And the company also announced it is ramping down its team in Sydney, Australia. As a result, Ubisoft is also closing its live service shooter X Defiant, which came out this past May. That game is going to shut down in June of 2025. It's obviously been an extremely difficult stretch for the games industry over the last couple of years. When you see an announcement like this, obviously it's very sad. We're always disheartened when any publisher or developer of any size, whether it's an indie team of 10 that's laying off people or a several thousand employee company like Ubisoft laying off people. Do you even feel shocked at this point? Like, it used to be like a big shock when this news would hit social media. Like, how does it even hit you? I'm almost desensitized to it at this point.
Yeah, part of it's definitely that because this year, I think somebody said that we're almost at the point where the number of layoffs this year is more than 2022 and 2023 combined.
Which
I
is
saw something
absurd.
like that on Blue Sky, and I don't know if we've crossed that threshold yet, but the fact that it's in the same ballpark is insane. That being said, though, I can't say I would have been surprised with Ubisoft specifically, even if this was an isolated case. They've been struggling for years now. My heart goes out to everyone impacted, but it's one of those things where I'm looking at the current state of the company and how their like releases have been doing, and I'm very, very concerned that if like AC Shadows doesn't do like absurdly well, it might just be curtains for the company. And I'm not looking forward to that.
And there are those rumors that they're actually exploring a sale.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's going to impact that at all. Like, I have a lot of love for Ubisoft. I really enjoyed the Splinter Cell series when that was firing on all cylinders. Now there's like the remake of the first one that who knows what the state of that is.
Who knows
Uh,
what's the state of the Prince of Persia Sands of Time remake. It's like,
yep.
and obviously like Lost Crown came out this year and that was incredible. And
Hmm.
it's like particularly incredible on Switch too. And from all accounts, it seems like it underperformed pretty badly. So
And Star Wars Outlaws underperformed, which I don't think Star Wars Outlaws is the best Star Wars game ever made, but it's better than I think people gave it credit for. I have,
yeah,
I put like 20, 25 hours into it and I had a really great time with what I played. And, I also traveled to Sweden to play it for the Game Informer cover story. And I
yeah,
came away like, oh, I really like what they're doing in a lot of ways, in a lot of mechanics that they've implemented. And there's so many systems stacked on top of each other that they could easily repurpose some of the stuff that they did for Star Wars Outlaws in other franchises, similar to how I've always said that Warner Brothers should have repurposed that Nemesis system for things like Batman or even like the Harry Potter franchise. Like, there are so many things that they could do with a Nemesis system at Warner Brothers. I would love to see like the reputation system get put it onto an Assassin's Creed game or something else like that. I think there is so much that they could do with that. And
yeah,
Star Wars Outlaws was really laying the groundwork for that, but it also very much underperformed. And then having AC Shadows delayed until next year probably hurt them a lot this year as well.
yeah.
Not to mention X Defiant also seemed to underperform pretty substantially.
Yeah, I hope for the best, but it's one of those things where I'm bracing myself for what feels like an inevitability sometime early next year. And that does not feel good. It does not
No.
feel good at all.
I mean, I don't know if I'm as bleak on the outlook for Ubisoft as a whole as you are, but it could start being the point where they start shedding as much excess fat as they possibly can before, just like, okay, well, we're only going to keep like our money makers like Assassin's Creed up and running. But even that
Yeah.
franchise has been struggling a decent amount. I think Mirage underperformed. Uh, Valhalla, I don't remember how well that
Valhalla
did.
sold really well. Like I
That
think
was
that
also a launch title for the new
yeah,
gen consoles, so that explains that.
as far as I remember it, and I could be completely wrong, but I think Valhalla was the last game they released that was unequivocally a major success. So
Wow. Well, I'm rooting for them because I love the
me too.
Assassin's Creed games. I wish they would have put out the Feudal Japan game, back in like the heyday of the series, like
Yeah.
AC4, AC Unity, like around that era. I think they should have capitalized on the fan demand of feudal Japan, because now they're late to the game because we already got Ghost of Tsushima, which did a lot of what Assassin's Creed does, and we even have a sequel coming next year that AC
That's
Shadows is going to have to compete with,
yeah.
even though it's different parts of the year. Presumably, Ghost of Yotoi is going to come out at the end of the year, and AC Shadows is at the start of the year. but still, it's like, man,
Man,
that's
if I was someone that was specifically into that type of game, I I'm pretty sure I would just wait, because one of the problems that even Ubisoft themselves have acknowledged is that they've gotten a reputation where it's like, never buy a Ubisoft game at launch. Even if it's fully polished, it's going to be on discount in like a month to like half off. And or in the case of Star Wars Outlaws, didn't they do a patch like a month and a half later to get rid of the stealth segments that pretty much everyone hated?
I don't know, have they? I might have to
Yeah,
go
yeah,
back because that was, like, the thing that I was like, "Man, I'm really enjoying, like, the open world stuff, but, like, some of these stealth sections are bummers." And, yeah, if they did that and or at least toned them down, I
yeah,
might go back and try and finish that before the end of the year, but, yeah, I don't know. I'm hopeful, I'm rooting for them. I think Assassin's Creed Shadows looks awesome. I got
yeah.
to see an extended behind closed doors demo, while I was out in LA around the Summer Game Fest timeframe,
Same.
and yeah,
I
it
yeah,
looked promising. I thought it looked like a lot of fun, and it looks like a good combination of like the old school Assassin's Creed and then my personal favorite Assassin's Creed, which is Odyssey. I
yeah,
think that's a really great action RPG, and then the original style of Assassin's Creed, something like Syndicate or Brotherhood, like it kind of brings elements of that in as well. So I think Shadows has a lot of potential. It's just a matter of have people kind of soured on the franchise, and I think they
yeah,
might have because the sales have not bared out to be like particularly great in recent years.
yeah.
But James, we're going to take our first break of this episode, and when we return, we're going to be talking about a trio of new releases on Switch. We will be right back. We are back, and though the release calendar is starting to wrap up for 2024, we still have a few new games to chat about. The biggest is the one we are going to lead off with, and that is Fantasian Neo Dimension. This is a game by Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi that originally came out in 2021 exclusively on Apple Arcade, but now, as of this week, it is on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and yes, Nintendo Switch. James, you did the review of Fantasian when it hit Apple Arcade in 2021, right?
Yes, I did.
Uh, Talk me through what your key takeaways were from that original release back on Apple Arcade, which, by the way, it was a two-part release. I believe the first part hit April 2021, and then the second part was like August 2021.
That would be correct, because I remember I started playing it like a little bit before the part 2 update hit, and then I ended up finishing the game like in late August of that year. So it was,
Perfect.
yeah.
So
Um,
talk me through your key takeaways from that original version.
so first off, when I started playing Fantasian back then, one thing I didn't expect, because like you look at it and you can tell this is very obviously tripping from like Sakaguchi's previous works on. I would say the two main ones would be Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII.
Okay,
Uh,
well that's a strong foundation. Two of the greatest RPGs to ever exist.
yeah. So I started playing it, and part one is pretty linear. I'd say that the pacing of the game is very, very similar to, again, either Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy VII, where it's like it's linear until like the latter half of the game where it really opens up. Kind of like how, like in Final Fantasy VII, you have the Midgar segment that's like a couple hours long, and then as soon as you get out of Midgar, the game really kind of is like, okay, there's way more for you to do now, and it just can get a bit overwhelming. And I feel like a lot of people that played Fantasian when it first came out kind of hit that, because the second half of Fantasian Part 2, not only does it like open up quite a bit, but it adds in like a skill tree for characters. And
Oh
very
wow.
specifically, you can change out the skill tree whenever. And the reason why is that the game is difficult, like infamously so. Like you've even had reviews of the new version come out where people like Eurogamer are talking about how the new normal difficulty, which is easier than the original difficulty, was still like noticeably like hard for them. And the original hard difficulty for Fantasian, I remember when I played it, and that wasn't just me, it was other people at RPGSite, it was other people in this like RPG community that a couple of us are also a part of, were like, we were playing through and it's like, why is this Apple Arcade exclusive RPG one of the hardest RPGs we've ever played? And that's no joke. Like if you pick up Fantasia and you play the hard difficulty, which was the original difficulty, be prepared, because it's not one of those cases where you can grind. That was actually the reason why I loved it so much, is it was hard, but it was hard in the sense that you had to know how to deal with each specific boss. Need to learn how to deal with each specific mechanic. It's like which characters and which abilities you need to use, which what equipment do you need to have? Because in a lot of RPGs these days, stuff like accessories is a nice to have. Like you might get a buff to your like attack or defense. Maybe you might get a resistance to one status ailment. And in a lot of games, that's just it makes your life easier, but you can still probably get through the game like barely engaging with that system. The thing that makes Fantasian so different is that it's an RPG for people that have been playing RPGs all their life. And it really focuses in on the fact where it's like most RPGs, you'll have status ailments and you can't really use them on anything besides regular enemies. There's like no reason to use them with bosses.
Mhm.
Fantasian, there's multiple bosses where the one and only way you can manage to succeed is by using status ailments against them.
So it's like Maester Seymour at the top of Mount Gagazet, where it's like you just want to poison him and then he just ends up dying on his own.
Yeah, like one boss in particular is like a two-part boss where they'll switch between each other and kind of like block like attacks against them. Because one of the cool things that Fantasian has is it's turn-based, but it's also a bit of action in the sense that you have to aim your attacks. There's like one boss early on where it's like you have a character that can do like basically the Dragoon type character where they can do attacks that come from the top and like slam down. And if you
Mhm.
look at it at the enemy's animation, you time it where you do it right as they're like kind of opening their mouth and like kind of leaning back and it hits, you'll get like a critical hit because you're attacking them basically directly into your stomach or something.
Okay. So I guess what are the differentiating factors of Fantasian versus other RPGs? So it's like these kind of handcrafted dioramas are the backgrounds, right? And they're
Yes.
absolutely beautiful. I played a decent amount. And I know like there's a mechanic where you can like hit enemies or like line up your attacks so it hits multiple enemies if you're strategically positioned in the right
Yep.
way. What else is kind of like the elevator pitch for what makes this game so special? Because you're very positive on this title.
Yes. Like it's been kind of interesting seeing so many people surprised that we gave it such a high score. Because when it originally came out on Apple Arcade, I gave it a 9 out of 10.
Okay.
I updated it to a 10 out of 10 for Neo Dimension
Wow.
because the main thing that kept like held me back was as much as I love the difficulty, it was one of those things where I don't think most people would be able to manage with it. So the fact that there is an optional easier difficulty now, that's good. But also when I played it on Apple Arcade, like on Apple TV, I had like so many crashes. I had like 8 or 9 crashes throughout the game. It doesn't autosave. So it was one
Oh
of those
no.
things where the state of the game as I played it then, I loved it. I would have given it a 10 then, but the technical aspect and also the fact that I wouldn't say that the difficulty necessarily tied into my review, but it was definitely one of those things I had to mention because it's like, well, it's so hard that even I'm noticing it, and I play RPGs for a living. It was definitely one of those things that I had to mention. But Neo Dimension uh, basically fixed all those things. But like you said, the dioramas are like the number one reason people talk about this game. I think the further into the game you get and the closer you look at it, especially on the new version where it's like in full 4K, if you're playing on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, or PC, you look at some of the dioramas and it's like, this can't have been cheap to do. Like with how much details some of the dioramas have, it's like, oh man, how much time and money did they spend on this alone? It's like, so there's that. There's the battle system. Another thing is that for anyone that's played other Mistwalker games, you've probably heard of Lost Odyssey and how it has a big focus on these like kind of visual novel style like character story things. And Fantasian indeed has those two in the form of memories. So it's kind of like a mix of all of the games that Sakaguchi has worked on throughout his career as like the master of RPGs. And it really does feel like instead of it just being like, okay, we're going to put this in and that in, it really does feel like a greatest hits will still be in its own thing.
And you mentioned a key word there for me, which is Lost Odyssey, which has long been one of my favorite RPGs of, I guess it was the last 15 years now, 20 years. I don't know. How old is that game at this point? When did that
I
come
think it
out?
was 2007, so it's all like it's
Oh
17
my
years older now.
gosh.
Yeah.
The last 2 decades. Yeah, that is. I mean, it's one of my favorite RPGs of the last 2 decades, and it's by the same developer that made Fantasian, Hironobu Sakaguchi's studio Mistwalker, and it also has new compositions. Both of these games, new compositions from Nobuo Uematsu. I'm honestly still waiting for Lost Odyssey to come to literally anything else because I can play it on my Xbox Series X, but man, would I love to have it on the go on something like Switch or Steam Deck.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if that like a handheld Xbox becomes a thing and it has like proper Xbox back compat for 360 games, I'll
Mhm.
buy it just for having a portable version of Lost Odyssey. Because I've been wanting to return to it, but it's one of those things where it never got like a Series X or even One X update, so it's still 720p, and it's like I can deal with 30 FPS for a turn-based RPG. I'm fine with that, but it's like, man, on modern displays, I look at it, it's like, oh man, I wish it had a resolution bump.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't like put any new like kind of remaster out because it's a very well liked RPG on a system, the Xbox, that doesn't have a ton of exclusive RPGs, and it's like that might be one of their best RPGs that's ever been exclusive to the Xbox. So you think they'd want to lean into that a little bit more because every time I talk to Phil Spencer, he mentions like an enthusiasm for appealing to the Japanese market, and I know that Lost Odyssey predates Phil Spencer being in charge of Xbox, but it's still like, man, there's an opportunity there. That's a great game from a guy who has a very strong rapport with the Japanese community and fans of Japanese RPGs. And yeah, it's just kind of, despite being backwards compatible, it's still kind of just like rotting on the vine.
Yep.
But now we have Fantasian Neo Dimension. Fast forward 3 years from its Apple Arcade release, available on consoles and PC. You played the PC version, correct?
Yes, someone else at RPGSite did cover the Switch version. They said it was fine. The main problem is that there's some frame drops like here and there, and the loading times are a bit rough. It's still fine. Like if you want to play the game and you only have a Switch, like I'd still recommend it. But if you have a Steam Deck, maybe play it there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have a Steam Deck, but I would like to check it out on Switch. I'm still
Yeah,
waiting to see if I am able to get a code from the developers because
yeah,
I requested it, but it's been slow to come in, unfortunately. So I have not had a chance to play this version. I did play the Apple Arcade version, not all the way through. I only played like maybe the first 5 hours of the Apple
yeah,
Arcade version, and I enjoyed what I played. You talked a little bit about the normal difficulty instead of the extremely hard. I do find it funny that they just relabeled the normal difficulty of the original to hard because they knew people struggled with it, and rather than calling this new difficulty easy, they're like, no, this is normal.
yeah. So originally, I thought that was a little bit like I wouldn't say cowardly, but I definitely had like some opinions about it. But then I don't remember which outlet had the specific interview, but there was an interview with Sakaguchi where he deliberately said, "It's like, well, the reason why the original difficulty was so hard is that the people that tuned the fights weren't the game like the battle designers, it was the programmers that did the tuning for it.
Oh,
So this new difficulty, we actually went back and tuned it ourselves. And going by the fact that we're still seeing people say that it's difficult, I'm very like before this new version came out, I would have said if you want the original experience, stick to the hard difficulty because that's how the battles were designed. But hearing them say that and hearing also that you still have to like play on the game's own terms with strategizing and whatnot. If you're playing this game for the first time and you have nothing to prove, just stick to normal. Just
mm.
stick to normal.
That's been the thing that I've done. It's like I don't need to play the hardest difficulty, especially in these long RPGs where I'm already going to be pouring like tens of
Yeah.
hours into it.
And
I don't know.
that's one thing worth mentioning of Fantasia. I feel like not a lot of people realize this is like over 60 hours long.
That was another question I was going to ask you is how long is this? So it's like 60 plus hours?
Yes, to put in perspective, and I am an outlier here. Let me be clear of that. I play RPGs at an unreasonably fast pace. I double checked right before I started playing Neo Dimension, and I checked my play time when I completed it. Uh, I finished Fantasian, the original version, exactly 1 hour quicker than I finished Metaphor, and that was a 100% playthrough.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty substantial experience. What else does this version add? I mean, obviously, you mentioned the normal difficulty. You mentioned the kind of fix some of the tech issues of the original. I'm assuming for most versions, if maybe the Switch version, the visuals are improved over the arcade version, the Apple Arcade version, or is it kind of the same, just like up res to bigger screens? Like, what are the improvements that Neo Dimension has that the Apple Arcade version did not?
So for one thing, yeah, the resolution is better. So on certain platforms, it'll look better. But there is one problem with that. Like the way that they scan the dioramas, like not every scene has is at the same like quality and like focus level as the others. Like there's some scenes where you look at it on like a 4K monitor or TV, and it's like, wow, holy crap. And then you look at some others and it's like, oh man, that is kind of a bit out of focus. That's actually the main reason why I spent most of my time on Steam Deck, because at that point you don't really get the dichotomy between those two different like quality levels as much.
Hmm.
So if you're going to play this, I would recommend number one, if you have one like a PC handheld like a Steam Deck. Number two, if you don't, get it on Switch, because if you're like me, you're gonna notice that difference and it's gonna take you out of the experience a bit. But yeah, so that's like one main thing. It is upgraded, but it's inconsistent in that regard. And that's
Hmm.
like my one major complaint. And it's not even a major complaint, it's more like a minor one. The other thing that they added is it has full voice acting. Well, not full voice acting, but for story scenes and side quests, there's full voice acting for those.
Got it.
And that was something that the original Apple Arcade release did not have. And I'm a big fan of the voices that they've used for the main cast. I haven't checked out the Japanese dub because I decided to stick with the English one. But the voice direction is really good. I love the casting and direction that they've done for the entire cast. It really adds a lot to the game, especially those memory scenes that are like the Lost Odyssey memory stuff, where it's like those are fully voice acted now, and that really adds a lot to the presentation.
It almost sounds like the way their approach to voice acting with something like Final Fantasy X, where, if you're just talking to a random NPC on the side of the road, it's just going to be text. But then when you get to like the big impactful story moments, then it's fully voiced.
Yes, yes,
Or if you're talking to like, a main character or something
yeah,
like that, then yeah, you're going to get the full voicing of that character. I don't mind that.
yeah.
Um, you gave a very specific recommendation at the start of what I believe is, from your original review. I would not recommend playing Fantasian unless you belong to a very specific subset of RPG players. Can you distill that recommendation down to those listening here so they can decide whether or not this is for them?
Yeah. First off, I don't really think that recommendation still completely holds now that there's the easier difficulty. It was one of those things where it's like the stipulation where, again, even the developers themselves have said, yeah, the original difficulty was overtuned. We weren't able to balance it to what they had originally intended. So if you're talking about the hard difficulty, the original difficulty, it's one of those things where it's like you need to be like systems heavy. And I think the best way I can describe it is that the two people at RPGSite that like Fantasian the most are me, myself, and Adam Vitali. And you know Adam, so you know
Mhm.
how much like sicko RPG stuff he plays. I'm the same. Both of us, we love dungeon RPGs, stuff like Etrian Odyssey, stuff like well, pretty much everyone knows Etrian Odyssey. I think that's the only dungeon RPG series that most people are familiar with. But it's like if you've played Etrian Odyssey, then you know the types of like RPGs we're talking about when we say sicko RPGs. Fantasian's definitely in that camp on the original difficulty. And it sounds like there's still some of that with the normal mode, but not to the sense where if you haven't played those types of RPGs before, that you would be just completely filtered out and not have a good time.
Mm.
So it's like when I did my original review and I left the original text and then like addended the like new stuff for Neo Dimension, because I figured, and I said this on Blue Sky, like Apple Arcade games inherently have an expiration date. And going forward, I would never recommend anyone play the Apple Arcade version over this new release. So there was no point to really just having separate reviews when it's like, well, for history's sake, Fantasian Neo Dimension is Fantasian. I'm not sure
Mm.
how you feel about that, but it's like interesting circumstances for us because not many outlets did reviews on part two, like the full package once it hit. But we figured that was probably the best way of going about it. But yeah, that first line was really only applicable to the original release. But I would still say that even if you're playing the normal difficulty now, you're going to have to work, like you're going to have to play by the game's rules. It's still going to ask you to do things that not a lot of RPGs will. Like bosses, some of them you're going to have to use status ailments against them. There's going to be like you can't rely on the same party composition for every boss. There's some bosses that very specifically ask you to use your whole party or to use specific abilities that certain characters have and stuff like that, which I love. But it does make it a little bit less like there's a little less player expression in that sense, in that sense, and it's more of a game where it's like, okay, it's like a puzzle box solution.
Mm. Now we've talked about how good this year has been for RPGs. You gave this game a 10 out of 10, which is not a common occurrence. Where does this rank on your overall favorite games of 2024?
It's tough to say that because like there's been so many other RPGs that came out this year, and haven't really thought about it as a 2024 release because again we reviewed it in 2021. Like we gave it our RPG of the year 2021, so it's not just me that feels this way. Like the whole reason I even felt comfortable like upgrading it to a 10 is like, well, anyone that's read us for long enough knows that how we feel about this game, and like the few complaints we had have been alleviated, so it only makes sense. But yeah, if Fantasian hypothetically came out today, and I guess the remaster came out
I
today,
mean, I
but
think for a lot of people it has because,
yeah,
not
yeah,
like half of the listing population probably never even touched an iPhone. Like they're listening to this on their Samsung Galaxy or whatever Android phone, and the other half, it's maybe like a 5% of the listeners are subscribers to Apple Arcade. So for all intents and purposes,
yeah,
for
yeah,
most of the listeners to this show, it's probably a brand new release.
yeah. If I was playing this for the first time this year, this would probably be my number one RPG release.
Wow.
Definitely in top three. Definitely top three. But it's tough because this has been a really, really good year for RPGs. So
It has been. And if you want to read James' full review, you can do so over on RPGSite.net. And again, he gave it a 10 out of 10 in the upgraded or updated version of his review from 2021. You can read the full original text and then the amendment that he put at the very end of that review. So RPGSite.net is where you will find that. That is the primary game that we wanted to talk about on this main segment of this episode. But there are two other games that I have been checking out. One of them, I was playing the Switch version. The other one is a PC game that is coming to Switch in a week here. And the first one, Rollercoaster Tycoon Classic. So, James, when I got the PC that I'm using right now, it is, at the time when I got it back in like 2016, it was a really beefy gaming rig. Right now, it's still I mean, it was so beefy back, 8 years ago when I bought it that it still plays most games pretty well to this day. So that's just an idea of how powerful it was back in 2016. The first game that I installed was Roller Coaster Tycoon, the classic game from like 1997, 1998, something like that. So, needless to say, my PC was not being fully utilized in that regard. But now, but just that, all that goes to say how much I love these classic Roller Coaster Tycoon 1, Roller Coaster Tycoon 2. Roller Coaster Tycoon Classic is now available on Switch, and it includes most of the parks and scenarios from the first two games, the first two RCT games, which are the only two that matter to me anyway. Like I kind of fell off when they went full 3D visuals with RCT 3. So all of or not all of them, because there were some licensed ones that were mixed into the original two games, and they didn't get those licenses, so those dropped off. But most of the parks and scenarios from the first two classic games. Plus, they added more than 40 extra parks that are just like bonuses into this package, which brings the total number of parks that you can play through well over 130. So that's awesome. Um, and it has the original visuals. This was actually put on mobile a couple of years ago, and they've brought it over to Switch. And it plays fine. Like you're using the left stick to control a cursor,
mm,
basically. So it's kind of clunky in that regard, but it plays like when I first fired it up, and I was just like, okay, how is this going to control? And I saw that you were using the left stick on your controller to control like a mouse cursor. Like I was like, oh no, this is going to suck. And it works reasonably well for what that is, right? Like it's not catastrophic. It doesn't. It definitely feels like, okay, this was designed for PC, and this is just like a way that you can play this on your console. And for that, I don't hate it. And I like having an on the go version of one of my favorite PC games of all time. And of course, I could install it on my Steam Deck if I wanted to, but
Most
you know,
people don't have a Steam Deck, so
a
it's
lot of
like,
people, a lot of
yeah,
people don't have Steam Deck. A lot more people have Switches than they have Steam Deck, especially listening to this show.
yeah.
So I fooled around with it for a little bit. I played through like a park. I went through the tutorial, and there are a lot of like shortcuts that you can do because like there's a lot of like menu buttons that you would have to click in order to be able to, rotate the camera or delete a track or something like that. And it's not explicitly expressed how you do that. You have to go into the options menu in order to see like, oh, if I hold down this button, it'll give me the shortcut. So I don't have to go down and like select the bulldozer in the lower left corner and then go back up to the part that I want to delete. So now it's like, oh, if I hold B, it'll automatically delete that part. So that once you get to know like the shortcuts, it becomes a lot more fluid of an experience. There's also a designer mode where you can go into like a sandbox, not worry about any kind of like, you know,
Pesky customers you have to keep happy.
customers. You don't have to worry about financial restrictions. Like you can just design like a roller coaster however you
Yeah.
want.
Here's a question. Does it have touch controls at all in like handheld mode?
Well, getting to that, no, it does not, which
Oh
is
man.
a huge missed opportunity because if you're controlling a cursor, that is exactly the type of thing that would translate well to a touch screen, right?
It
Like
also feels crazy to me because you said that this originally released on mobile. I'm assuming this is a port of the mobile version, which would have had touch controls. So
100%. So that's why I don't understand why it's missing touch controls. It seems like a complete missed opportunity, and it seems like it wouldn't be that big of a stretch to
yeah,
implement them if they were indeed in the mobile version. But yeah, getting back to designer mode, there it's nice to be able to create like a custom coaster there because you can create the custom coaster in the gameplay itself. But if you go into designer mode, you don't have to worry about any of these restrictions, and then you can save that template. And then when you go to put it in a park, you can just automatically have it populate the one that you created and then like have it be like a blueprint going
that's
forward
nice. That's nice.
alongside the ones that the developers have already implemented as well because there's a ton of them. And it's funny because I fired up like, okay, I'm going to build a coaster here, and I fired it up and I was like, man, why would anybody do like one of the preset uh type like the preset blueprints that the developer programmed in here? All the fun of Rollercoaster Tycoon is creating the roller coaster. So that was like, oh man, I want to do this. But my problem, and it was my problem back in the PC days as well, I always create the roller coasters too extreme for anybody to ever want to ride on them. I created one that I didn't think was that crazy, and then like everybody walked up to it, looked at it, and then like they did like a shocked face and then walked away. And everybody's thoughts are, this is too extreme for me, that looks too intense for me. And then I look at the rating because you can check like, okay, well, how high does this go, and like what is the g forces available on this, and what is like the intensity of this. And the intensity of this one that I made, that all it was just very hilly. It wasn't particularly steep. It wasn't particularly high up, but it had some turns. It had some drops that went right into to climbs. We're using the momentum. It was ultra extreme intensity, and I was like, man, what? I did not even think this was that bad.
Man,
But
some of those virtual like park goers would not last a day at Magic Mountain Six Flags.
but yeah, that's always been kind of a tripping point for me with Roller Coaster Tycoon is that like I think that and I'm not like a guy who goes on like the most extreme roller coasters in real life, but I think that these virtual park goers are a little bit wimpy. And I think that the rating system is not quite as lenient as I would like it to be. But that's just a legacy problem.
Yeah.
Overall, this is a game that I'm glad is on Switch. I'm glad it exists. I hope that they patch in the touch controls sooner rather than later because that seems like a really big missed
Yeah,
opportunity because
it seems like the one thing that you would kind of want if it's like a PC port. It's like, well, you're on a system that a lot of people are going to be playing in handheld mode. To not even have the option for touch controls feels like it must have been brought up on development. Hey, we should do this, and then like there was a decision made to not have it at least at launch. And I'd be very curious to know what that reason would be.
yeah, I would be shocked if they didn't patch it in like as like a thing down the road, unless this is just like a hey, we're gonna port this over to Switch and
Yeah.
then never think about it again. That's the
One
other thing
yeah.
that might get in the way of that. But like, man, I would be shocked if like in like the next couple of months we don't get a patch that adds
Yeah.
touch controls.
It's I guess just to bring it up really quick is apparently even like Fantasian doesn't have touch controls on Switch, but it does
Hmm.
on Steam Deck. So I mean, I guess maybe there's just something there that neither of us knows about.
Let me see here. Is it on Steam? Rollercoaster Tycoon Classic is on Steam as well, and it has very positive reviews. But you know, you don't have to worry about touch controls if you're playing it on your PC.
Yeah.
And it came out in 2017 on PC, so I don't know what the deal is. If they could have just, you know, and yeah, it's available on the iOS App Store. It's funny how Roller Coaster Tycoon Classic on the App Store is $6, and it's $20 on PC, and I believe $20 on Switch. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But
Reminds me.
it looks like the expansion packs are extra on the mobile version.
That
So I
makes
mean,
sense. Yeah.
not a crazy amount. Like there's a toolkit that's $6. And then two expansion packs that are $2 each. So I guess if you add all that up, it will be roughly the same as this amount. But yeah, it seems really strange to me that the 1.0 release was in 2016, and then it came to Steam in 2017, and now it's on Switch without touch controls. I don't know. It seems very strange to me, but I'm happy it's there. It's just that one glaring thing
Yeah. Yeah.
that would have held this back. Kind of like how you were saying, like, oh, this is one glaring thing that holds Fantasian back from being a 10 out of 10. I think that this is like holding Roller Coaster Tycoon Classic back from, it wouldn't be a 10 out of 10, but it would be
Yeah.
a pretty well scoring game. And I think that that is a glaring omission. But if this sounds up your alley, as it is mine, like I'm gonna play more of it. It is available now on Switch. And then the last game that I want to talk about is a game that came out this week on PC, but the Switch version was delayed last minute until I believe December 19th, or no, December 13th. AntonBlast. This is a game that I discovered at PAX West back in 2023. I went up. I was just, kind of doing a sweep of the floor because I was the only Game Informer rep at PAX West, and I was like, well, I need to play some indie games. So I spent a good chunk of one of the days in the indie corner, and man, this was one that really caught my eye. It's kind of like a Wario Land style experience. If you've played Pizza Tower, it's very much in that vein.
Yeah. And those
Which
devs are like friends, so it's like very funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually at the Game Awards last year, and I ran into Tony, who is the lead developer on AntonBlast, and he was like, "Oh, do you know these two guys?" And he introduced me to them. And he's like, "This is the guy who's like the lead developer on Pizza Tower. And this is the guy that did all the music for Pizza Tower." And I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome."
Yeah, they were sitting like right next to each other, like at the Game Awards last year, apparently, which was very, very funny. It's like every time I see people trying to be like, "Oh, there's a rivalry between the two of them," it's like, no, they're best buds.
Yeah, they're pals, and I got to hang out with them for a little bit during the Game Awards last year. But yeah, Anton Blast, it's a momentum kind of based. Like I would describe this game as a 2D platformer that is very much in line with like the Wario Land games, and it is a speedrunner's dream where the goal is basically to run forward, just plow through as many enemies as you can en route to getting through the level. And then at the end of the level, there's always fun like gimmicks and obstacles that you're going through. Like the first level is very straightforward, as you might imagine, getting you familiar with the controls. Then you get to like the second level, and there's suddenly like this swordfish that you'll climb on to the back of, and like you can blast through areas. And then there's electric eels in the water that like in rhythm will flash electricity that will shock you if you go in there. You have a set number of hit points each level, and you can like regain hearts through items. There's minor exploration elements, but mostly it's like you're going straight forward and you're trying to get to the end. The story is ridiculous. Like basically the devil is like, he is wanting to be the reddest creature in existence. Yes, you heard me right. Reddest, like the color red. He wants to be the most red color character in existence. And somebody said he looks at the mirror and says, "Who's the reddest of them all?" And they actually say, "Well, there's this this drunk down on Earth that he's so red because he presumably drinks so much, which is a very weird premise. So the devil goes and is like, I'm going to mess with this guy because I want to be the reddest creature. So he steals all the alcohol, or as they call it, spirits, from AntonBlast, or Dynamite Anton, I believe is his name. So Anton goes on this journey to collect his spirits that have been stolen by the devil. And after you get to the end of these levels, you get the spirit, and then it's happy hour, it's called, where you hit the dynamite and it blows up the level, and suddenly you're running backwards through the level that you just went through, but it's on all different paths a lot of the times. And you have a timer that you have to escape. And sometimes there's an enemy that's chasing you, and it might catch up to you. So like, it really does put your platforming
Yeah.
skills to the test. It's a lot of fun. It's very chaotic. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And I have not even talked about the boss battles yet. The first boss, I'll just talk about him. His name is Brawlbuster. So very fun name there. And it's like a pro wrestling match. So it's like different gimmicks and everything, where you're in a pro wrestling ring and you're basically just having to dodge attacks. And I'm like, all right, how do I damage this guy? I'm jumping on him. Anytime I get close to him, he grabs me and power bombs me and takes away one of my hearts. And I was like, all right, well, how do I do? So I just dodge him, and then he starts bouncing off of the ropes. And then he like stops after a few passes and starts like flexing and like, taunting me. And during that, I try to attack him. It doesn't do anything. So I realized that what I had to do was go into the ropes myself and then use them to propel me forward and
I love that.
like torpedo him basically while he's taunting me. So basically I'm just having to play like evasion during all of
Yeah.
this. And then when he like stops to taunt me, then I throw myself into the ropes and torpedo myself right at him. And that's how you damage him. And he starts going into different attack patterns. You have to learn his patterns. Super fun, very challenging, and it's the right amount of difficulty, because like I was getting frustrated a little bit, but it was also like, okay, I know what I did wrong. It was frustrating in the sense that like I think like, not to compare the games, and like every difficult game is Dark Souls, but what Dark Souls and Elden Ring and Bloodborne do so well is that they're difficult, but they give you that glimmer of hope of like, okay, next time I need to do this. This is exactly what I need to do to get further in this encounter. And that's how I felt every time I died in this first boss battle. I was like, okay, after I hit him 3 times, he's going to start doing this jumping move, and then he's going to slam down and shoot like fire each direction. I just need to look out for that. And then I need to wait for this next phase to happen. And then that's when I can attack. And then like you get into this uncharted territory, like, oh God, what is he going to do in this phase? And that is what is so awesome about the boss battles in this game, is like it lines you up where like it's challenging, but you know what you need to do. And once you figure out what you need to do, it's just a matter of doing it. And it sounds like it would kind of be up your alley, like you were talking about with the Metal Slug 3 encounters, where it's like, okay, you know exactly what you need to do. It's going to be hard as heck to do it, but if you can pull it off, you've got this in the bag. And that's what these boss battles feel like. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm actually playing the Steam version since it doesn't come out on Switch for another week or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that if you enjoy Pizza Tower, if you enjoy the Wario Land games, if you just like a chaotic 2D platformer, AntonBlast is an easy recommendation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting around to this eventually. I loved Pizza Tower. I played it a little bit late. I played it like early this year, and I had a great time with it. And I know people keep making the comparisons, but even the devs understand they're very similar games. Like even the happy hour mechanic, you have like Pizza Time and Pizza Tower. It's the same thing basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm excited to try it. Just I have like 3 other RPGs to get through, and it's like
It sounds like me, because like, ever since Game Informer closed, I've been having to try to keep up with all these games myself. And it's like, oh man, I really would love to play this game, but I also would love to, play Rollercoaster Tycoon Classic so I can talk about it on this show, or this other game.
Yeah, and I'm lucky because there was like a couple of like Nihon Falcom RPGs that came out in the West this year, like East 10 and Trails Through Daybreak. I played those in Japanese. I didn't have to play them again this year, but it's like kind of like equivalent exchange, because it's like, well, Falcom releases a new RPG every year in Japan, so I'm still not safe.
Well, if AntonBlast sounds up your alley, it is available now on Steam, and then you can look for it on the eShop, I believe, starting December 13th. We are going to take one final break, and when we come back, we'll be doing definitive ranking and getting James' eShop Gem of the Week. We will be right back. We are back, and it's time for Definitive Ranking, a recurring segment where we take a Nintendo topic and give our own personal top 5 lists. Since our main segment primarily focused on Fantasian Neo Dimension, which comes from one of the greatest RPG developers of all time, Hironobu Sakaguchi, I wanted to use this week's Definitive Ranking to celebrate the best RPGs on Switch. So James, I'm going to let you go first. Start at 5, count it down to 1, give me a quick sentence or two about each.
All right, so I kind of went back and forth on whether I wanted this to be a list of top 5 RPGs for a general audience, people that maybe aren't RPG sickos, or to just go on my personal list. I'm going to go with general audience one. I think
Okay,
that's
well, that's the
probably better.
approach I took, but also my
Yeah,
favorite, because I'm more of a general audience kind of guy when it comes to
yeah.
these RPGs.
So for number 5, I would say Undernaut's Labyrinth of Yomi, which is a dungeon RPG by Experience Inc. They also make the Spirit Hunter series, so like Spirit Hunter Deathmark and Spirit Hunter NG. Uh, the reason I put this at number 5 is I love dungeon RPGs, but it is a subgenre that is hard to recommend for most people. They're very systems heavy, and there's a lot of simpler dungeon RPGs that might be okay, but if I'm trying to get someone into that genre, they're maybe not a good gateway drug.
Mm.
This one kind of hits the balance of there's enough there to get you acclimated to what those more like extensive dungeon RPGs do, but it's not like so overwhelming that it will be completely impenetrable if this is your first. And I just think it's like a really, really good dungeon RPG. Like, just take a look at some of the art, and it's like, oh my god. So that's my number 5. Number 4 would be Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak.
Oh,
Uh,
okay, that's one I didn't even think about. That's a good shout out.
Yes, I know some people think, well, is that really an RPG? Ever since World, Capcom themselves have classified them as RPGs, and especially once you get to the end game in Sunbreak and the way that you like build up your characters, like equipment and whatnot, and like build crafting, it's very much like as in depth as like pretty much any other RPG on the market. I love it. I'm more of a fan of like World, but as far as like Switch RPGs go, like even if I have preferences, like Rise with Sunbreak is incredible, and it's one of the best, like not just RPGs, but one of the best games like in general on Switch. Certainly the best looking. Like, I'll say that much.
Awesome.
Number 3 would be Xenoblade Chronicles 3
Okay.
with Future Redeemed. I love Xenoblade Chronicles in general. Like, I'm super excited for Xenoblade Chronicles Cross Definitive Edition when it comes out early next year. That would be probably my favorite RPG on a Nintendo system at all. But for Switch, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is really good. I love that, at least for the base game. DLC is one thing, is something else entirely. But for the base game, you don't have to have played 1 and 2. I would still recommend people play them, but also all 3 of those games are like 70+ hour RPGs. So I completely understand anyone that wouldn't want to play like Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and then Xenoblade Chronicles 2 just to get to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Thankfully, you don't really have to. You do get some benefits, but by no means it's a requirement. Number 2 would be Octopath Traveler 2. That was an
Oh,
RPG
okay.
that released last year, and I was not a fan of Octopath 1. I was not a fan whatsoever.
I fell
Uh,
off it pretty hard.
but it was a bunch of small changes that altogether really made Octopath 2 probably one of my like top 5 RPGs of the last like decade. I really,
Mm.
really liked it. I think one thing that did it was the day and night cycle, and the fact that every character now has like different path actions depending on day and night. So it meant that you could have different characters that could do the same thing, just like depending on day and night. And there's more of a reason to switch between them because there's like a lot of puzzles that revolve around that day and night cycle, including in side quests. The battle system has seen a few improvements. There's like a limit break type system that, along with the job system, really adds to some like pretty fascinating combinations. Also, I would say that the story itself is a lot better. There's a couple of chapters where the different paths will cross, and then there's a final like conclusion that brings everyone together, and you can see the foreshadowing in each of the different character stories and whatnot. But I loved it a lot. Man, that's a good RPG.
I need to go back to it. I fell off the first one really hard after like probably 5 or 6 hours, and I was like, I don't know. It was fine, but like I've heard nothing but praise for Octopath 2, and I would love to check it out. I think I bought it when it first hit, and
Yeah.
I just never got to it because I think it came out. It was like it was a February release or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was like an early like last year release, and last year was, oh man, like
It
it.
was bananas.
I'm gonna be going through my backlog of 2023 releases for the next decade, I'm sure.
Same. I still haven't played Baldur's Gate to completion.
Oh God, yeah. And number one, Disco Elysium, the final cut.
Oh,
I,
interesting.
I would say that is definitely an RPG. I feel like a lot of people don't really consider it one, but it's like a CRPG, classical RPG. I would say that Disco Elysium is probably in my top 5 games of all time. I think is one of the
Whoa.
most important releases of the last, like, well, like I said, top 5 game of all time. I think, ironically enough, everything that surrounded that game's development since it came out, if
It's a
anything,
sad.
is, yeah, it's sad, but it kind of like solidifies the message that game had. It's like the fact that even it was susceptible to the same things it criticizes. It's somber, but as a piece of art, it kind of like almost completes it. Not to say that it wasn't like already a complete piece of art before then, but it's one of those games where it's just, I can't recommend it enough. It's life changing media.
Man, yeah, you got me adding it to my wish list now on Switch because I have the Steam version and it's like I could just play that, but I don't know, I always prefer to play on console if I can.
Yeah.
So you got me adding it to my wish list and I'm going to wait for a sale cuz $40 not a terrible price for like you're saying a life-changing piece of media. But when I have so many other games, it's like
Yeah.
I can hold off for now until it's
At least it's
time.
a shorter RPG. Like it's like what, 15, 20 hours, something like that.
Well,
Not too
hey,
bad.
that's doable.
Yeah.
Unlike most of the games on my RPG top five, by the way, before we go into mine, if you did go with like the sicko list, as you put it, what would have been your number one?
Ironically enough, it would have still been Disco Elysium.
Okay, well there we go. Would Fantasian have been on your top five
Yes,
if you
along
went
with
the
Saga,
sickos?
Scarlet Grace Ambitions, another game I gave a 10 out of 10 that caused a bit of uproar at the time.
Well, hey, there you go. That's all the recommendation you need for Fantasian, especially, and also Disco Elysium, which like I said, is available for $40 on the Switch eShop. My top five is going to be a lot more mainstream and probably a little bit more casual, and quite a few games from the past. Starting with number five, Persona 4 Golden. This was a game that this re-release, remake, updated version, whatever you want to call it, came out on Vita originally. And I remember people being like, "You need to play Persona 4 Golden. If you like RPGs, you need to play Persona 4 Golden." And then I played Persona 4 Golden like the opening hours, and I bounced off of it immediately. And I was like 2 hours deep of just like there was one battle that happened. I'm just like reading a novel essentially, and I'm just like, I don't even know if I like this game, and I'm putting in all these hours into this, and then I fell off, and then years later I finally went back. I bought a PlayStation TV, which allowed me to play Vita games up on my TV, and that's how I ultimately made it through Persona 4 Golden, and it's an absolutely incredible game. I'm so happy there are HD versions of it on consoles now, including Switch. And if you like the Persona series and you got into it through 5, you should go back and play P4G because it's also fantastic. Number four, I don't know if this was a launch. I think it was a launch window title, not launch title, but Golf Story. This
Oh
was
yeah, yeah.
a one of the few Switch exclusives that is on this list for me. Don't play Sports Story, which is the sequel to this game, because it stinks. Golf Story, however, is fantastic. It is basically like the mechanics of like the Mario Golf Game Boy Color game.
That's one
And
of the this is one of those RPGs that I really need to get around to, because like probably in my top 3 Game Boy Advance games is Mario Golf Advance Tour, and I completely 100%ed that game. So I know when I eventually get around to it, I'll probably love Golf Story as
and
well.
rather than it just being like, oh yeah, Mario Golf on Game Boy Color has that incredible RPG mode. Golf Story is just the entire RPG mode, right? Like it's just a story-based, story-driven exploration, but also like all of the battles are basically just like, hey, you're going to play in this golf tournament and you have to get this certain score. And it has like the classic kind of Mario Golf like meter gameplay, and then like it expands out to be like, oh, well, now you're playing disc golf, and that has an entirely different mechanic. And like I had such high hopes for Sports Story, and it did not meet any of those expectations, and it sounds like there was maybe some troubled development involved with that. But Golf Story hits all the high notes that you would want from a sports-based RPG game with like retro sensibilities. Definitely worth checking out. I believe it's still exclusive to Switch, so it's a perfect pick for this list. Also, a game that's probably going to be exclusive to Switch forever, Pokemon Legends Arceus. And this game did a great job of kind of mixing up the tried and true Pokemon formula rather than being like, oh, you got to go from gym to gym and like battle all these gym leaders like every other like mainline Pokemon game. This actually takes you back in time and you're going through a developing region and you're basically creating that region's first Pokédex. So you're going around discovering like the different Pokemon of the region, and like there's all these like early era Pokemon technology, like the Pokeballs are like steam powered, which is hilarious. So it's like and like it's the first attempt at like an open world style experience. Like Pokemon Sword and Shield had the wild area, which was kind of open world, but it was just like a big hub essentially. Pokemon Legends Arceus was like the one that made it so that like, okay, this is just this big open area. You can go and do anything and you can like stealthily sneak up on these Pokemon. There are boss battles in this where it's like you are just fighting a crazed wild Pokemon that and
Like a raid boss or something.
it's not even like you don't even use your Pokemon to battle them. It's like action-based battles where like you have these orbs that are you have to throw at them to calm them down as they attack you, and you have to avoid their attacks. So it's and I mean there are traditional Pokemon battles in there that are turn-based battles, but Pokemon Legends Arceus has me so hyped for Pokemon Legends ZA because that's the true successor to this game. And after Scarlet and Violet, which again I will say is a very good Pokemon game, it just plays like garbage. And I'm hoping that Switch 2 actually gets like an updated version of Scarlet and Violet.
I completely agree on that. Like I also love Legends Arceus. That would have been like a runner up on my list. But Scarlet and Violet is like one of the few games where I would love to play it more, but the performance is so bad that it actually gives me headaches whenever I play it for an extended period of time.
And there's one section in Scarlet and Violet where you go out into the middle of the water, and like that's like where you're supposed to go. So it's not like I was going off the map. Like I was following the main mission, mainline story mission, and you go out into the middle of the water. And I guess there's something about the rendering of the water that made it so like it basically became a slideshow. And again, this
Yeah.
is pre-release, so they've probably patched this to an extent. But
No.
I mean, they've to an extent because I
Yeah.
have gone back and when they released the DLC, I was trying to play through
Yeah.
that, and I was like, man, this is still really bad shape.
Yeah.
So I would love, and I mean, it was notoriously bad because Nintendo actually had to put out a statement saying like, we take our quality seriously, and this like was not up to our standards. And it's like, oh wow, that's rough when like, it's an exclusive game and you're putting out that statement.
Yeah.
So Pokemon Legends Arceus is the best Pokemon game on Switch, and that's why it gets a spot on this because it's really a great game. And it does have some performance issues. It doesn't run like smooth as silk by any stretch, but it's a lot better than Scarlet and Violet
A
was.
9-day difference.
Mm-hmm. Number 2, I mentioned this game already, Persona 5 Royal. It is my second favorite RPG of all time, and the only RPG that's better than it is my number 1, which we're going to get to in a second. This was the game that made me say, I need to go back and play Persona 4 Golden because now I know I love these games. And I've played through this game, which is anywhere between 110 and 130 hours. I've played through it twice. I played vanilla, and then
Oh
I
wow.
played and reviewed Persona 5 Royal when it came out in 2020. And the joke I always say is I was reviewing it, so I was like, on a tight deadline. I was neglecting all of my social responsibilities, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna just go out and like hang out with all my friends when I'm finally finished this review. And then like a few days before I finished this review, COVID hit, and I was social distancing for like an entire month before everybody else was. So Persona 5 Royal, well worth it. One of the best RPGs I have ever played, and now that it's finally on Switch, you should play it as well if you haven't already. And the epilogue is phenomenal. The epilogue that they added for Persona 5 Royal, that version specifically, is awesome, and they added a bunch of new character missions that are for some of like the side characters that really flesh them out and give you a lot of added context for who these characters are and make it so that some of the later story beats really hit a lot harder. So definitely recommend playing Persona 5 Royal. And then my number one of all time, Final Fantasy X 10-2 HD. Final Fantasy X, my favorite RPG of all time, my favorite Final Fantasy game of all time, and it's my third favorite game overall of all time. So, fantastic story. It really was kind of the pinnacle of RPGs at the time. It redefined what the Final Fantasy franchise was in PS2. It was the reason that I wanted a PS2 because I was at a friend's house and they broke this out after we were like, playing football outside. We came in, he's like, "Hey, you got to check out this game that I got." And it was like, the first Aeon summon. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is like mind blowing." And then like, I was in high school when it hit. So I'm playing through it and like my mind is getting blown at every plot twist and turn. Some of them are, kind of tropes at this point, but back then it was absolutely incredible to like see this story unfold. The visuals, even in the HD version, you can tell this is a game from over 20 years ago, but they still hold up remarkably well in a lot of places. And if you're a turn-based RPG fan, this, in my opinion, is the best turn-based RPG system that I've ever played. So that is my definitive ranking list. We didn't have any overlap whatsoever, which is
Yeah, I'm surprised about
pretty
that.
crazy.
Yeah.
But I like it like that. I like it that way. It's cool when like it's like, okay, we four of our entries are the same, but it's also cool in a completely different way when we have 10 completely different entries in our lists. But James, that brings us to the final segment. It is the eShop Gem of the Week, a chance for you to shout out a game that might not otherwise get some shine on this podcast. What is your eShop Gem of the Week?
Uh, the name is a bit unfortunate, but it's Drainus from Team Ladybug, who is also yeah, it's very unfortunate naming. Very unfortunate naming. They're the developers that have done a bunch of like smaller Metroidvania titles. They were behind Record of Lotus War, Deedlit, and Wonder Labyrinth. They did the Shin Megami Tensei Synchronicity Prologue, which was a like free game that was released as an advertisement for the then upcoming uh, Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey Redux, I believe, or yeah, I think it was Redux in America. And they also most recent, well, Deedle and Wonder Labyrinth was their most recent Metroidvania release, but they also did Toho Luna Nights, I think, which every single one of those games except for the Shin Megami Tensei game is available on Switch. Drainus is not a Metroidvania though; it is a shoot 'em up, or as I like to say, a schmideways because it is a sideways shoot 'em up action game.
It looks like an R type almost.
Yes, yes, R-Type or Gradius. It's
Gradius, yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's I played it when it came out on PC. I played it on Steam Deck. It's available on Switch now though. It is a lot of fun, and if you've wanted to ever like try out the shmup like genre, I'd say it's a very good place to start. It's not super like demanding versus some of its contemporaries, but there is a new game plus mode that is a bit more challenging, and it's just a lot of fun. The level design's great. The bosses are incredible. The pixel art is incredible. I think it's like a lot of like rotoscope 3D that's then overlaid with pixels. It's just a great time overall.
It is
So
a very pretty game. I will give you that. Yeah, just looking at it, as soon as I saw it, I was like, that was my first time hearing it said out loud, the name, and I was just like, oh, that is unfortunate. Their sequel is Rectus. No, so yeah, Drainus is $20 on the eShop, and it came to Switch in 2023. It looks right up my alley because one of my kind of unsung heroes of the Super Nintendo was Super R-Type, which I had a blast playing that. And I often forget about that game until somebody brings up a game like this. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I really loved Super R-Type. I would love a game like that. And it sounds like this is a pretty good one.
yep.
All right. Well, I'm adding that to my wish list, waiting for it to go on sale. Again, I'm in no rush to pick up new games right now because I already have so much I need to check out, either for this podcast or for other reasons. So yeah, thanks for sharing that eShop gem. And as a programming note, I will be traveling to the Game Awards next week, so I'll be pre-recording next week's episode. So no news next week, but I'm sure we'll have plenty coming out of the Game Awards for the following week. But for next week, I have a pretty cool guest lined up to talk about something that I think Nintendo fans will be excited to learn more about. I know I'm very excited for the conversation to happen, so look forward to that. And before we close out this show, for those curious about what's happening over on All Things Gamers, which is that extra podcast that I do each week for my $10 patrons, I invited YouTube and Twitch content creator Mobile Gamer on to discuss the state of, you guessed it, mobile games. So he has his finger on the pulse of that landscape. And, I chatted up with him. It was really fascinating to dig into how mobile games have evolved and how they're faring right now throughout that episode of All Things Gamers. But James, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you so much to everyone for listening. As you know, the Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in, but you can also get in touch with me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com or hit me up on social media at Brian P. Shea. Coincidentally, that is also my YouTube channel name, and if you would subscribe to that channel, it would help me out a lot. James, where can people find you online?
You cannot find me on Twitter, but you can find me on Blue Sky at the sweet 2Ws, SWWEET, .bluesky.social. You can also find me, obviously, at RPGSite, and I do freelance stuff at other outlets. I've done stuff for, like, Games Radar. I did stuff for Nintendo Insider a couple times, and recently I've been doing a lot of Upload VR stuff, too. But yeah, mostly RPGSite. And you can find me on socials at, again, sweet, SWWET, .bluesky.social.
Yeah, Blue Sky's the place to be right now. I'm sunsetting my Twitter account very soon, but still have a little bit of promotional utility for it. But that is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode of All Things Nintendo, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons to the podcast. Aaron Smith, Abdullah, Adam Scott, Elena R., Alec Acanino, Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chain Whippin, Chaps My Ass, Chris Callie, Colton Bredlow, Dan Norman, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jackal, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Jill Grote, Johnny Five, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joseph Jury, Joshua DeProy, Justin Childress, Cody Gibson, Creeper 207, Lindsay Hartz, Mad Genie Confused Koala, Marshall Thompson, Megan S., Michael Anderson, Nintendo 101, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Philip G. Cox, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sousa, Roger Reichart, Russell Sayer, Scott Matthews, Sir Phobos, Smithy Poo, Tux DC, Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man, Zach Marcus, Zachary Pliggy, and Zek Three Swords Sama. Thank you so much for listening to and supporting the All Things Nintendo podcast. It really means a lot, and I couldn't do this without you.